And so, the most common graph that you're going to end up plotting once you've installed the regulator is a graph that looks like this. You're going to have your flat regulated section, and this should go from the peak fill when you fill it up to your maximum fill pressure down to the point at which the regulator has been set. So for ease, we'll continue to say that this regulator has been set at 100 bar. And so you filled your gun to 200 bar, it's been working perfectly okay, all the way down a nice flat line, and then you get to a point where all of a sudden the power does a quick spike, and then over a few shots starts to drop off. Now this typically will be over the power that you've required or under the power. Rarely you're going to get it spot on, so watch the other graphing videos to learn how to make the other adjustments. Now this peak happens after the regulator has stopped working, and so all this air pressure is working at 100 bar. These shots, it's all 100 bar, and then it gets to here and this air pressure is less than 100 bar because the regulator has stopped working. This means that at the present moment in time, this outlet valve chamber and the gas within it, the hammer travel, spring compressions, transfer port, etc., it is at its most efficient at the highest point of the graph. So that's when you're getting the maximum power out for the minimum effort in that system. And so you want to get rid of this spike and bring this down to where you require it, so that your line comes along and then pretty much drops off. It's quite hard to get rid of a little blip at the end. That can be very time consuming, but you need to get it down to an acceptable level. So this is what you're aiming for, straight line with a drop off, as is shown on the example of what you're trying to achieve here. So to do this, we first spoke about in the first video to do with graphing is the one called first fill and graph, and on that, if you've watched it, we spoke about gradually filling the gun up and recording the power every 5 bar. So you'd have plotted this up and then past the regulator set pressure, at which point it should become a flat line. So if you've got an air arms or Benjamin Marauder or any other gun with a pressure gauge that's after the regulator, it's quite easy to, when you hit this power spike, turn the gun over and look at the gauge, and it'll say, we'll take for instance it's 80 bar. So the regulator's set, say, for 100. After 100 and it's cut out, it spikes up, and the maximum power on the spike is when you've looked and it's at 80 bar. If you've not got a gun with a gauge on the bottom, this is why initially when you first filled the gun you should have filled it 5 bar, 2 or 3 shots, 5 bar more, 2 or 3 shots, and so that you know where the power spike is and at how many bar that's occurred, and so you know that that's when it's at its most efficient. And so to deal with this power spike, it's going to be a combination of things. So I would suggest, if this is the graph that you've got, before you start doing any alterations that I mention in this video, please watch the other videos on graphs, and that will tell you a little bit more about adjustments and the effects that they have. And so that's it, you've been and watched those videos, here we go. So you know that the regulators in this space here is the most efficient at 80 bar, but the regulator at the moment is set at 100 bar. And so if you turn the regulator down by adjusting the screw out, adjusting the screw in to reduce the output pressure, so adjust the screw in to adjust the output pressure down. So if you adjust it to where you think it's going to be at 80 bar, that will make it all very efficient, but by doing that, obviously this line here, the power line is going to come up because there's reduced force, reduced air pressure force pressing on the outlet valve. So if you reduce it down, you'll end up with far more power than you require, but it'll come along and then it'll drop off. And then so to get more shots at a less power, you've lowered the pressure of the regulator. You then have to increase the compression on the outlet valve spring. So for fine adjustments, when you're in the ballpark, you can use the hammer adjustment spring tension, the hammer travel and the transfer port restrictor screw. But to bring the power down, if it's considerably above what you wish for, pack and increase the compression on the outlet valve spring. So if this power spike's only a little spike, then you can adjust the regulator pressure down a little bit and then just use these settings. But if the power's come up considerably and it's a big spike, then please put a packer in behind the outlet valve spring. Now this only needs to be a small packer, as mentioned in the follow-on videos. If it's a very small hard spring like in a Falcon or a Brocock Enigma, then you only probably need 0.2 to 0.4 mil thick and take it up in little increments. If you've got a air arms or a Hatsan, then the adjustment might be between 0.5 of a mil and 1 millimeter, and then take it up in 0.5 millimeter compression intervals until you've brought the power down reasonably enough to use the other adjustments on the gun. So that's if the power is above and there's a big power spike. Obviously if the general power that you've got is below the power that you're aiming for, but the peak of the spike here is level with what you're aiming for, then hopefully just lowering the pressure on the regulator down to whatever that is, 80 bar or whatever you've found it to be on your first 5 bar, 5 bar, 5 bar fill graph. Then if you estimate, adjust the screw on the regulator to lower the regulator pressure down, then lowering it will bring this line up here until you just get a nice line and a drop off there. This should also, both of these should also lead to getting more shots because it makes the system more efficient. So I hope that's been of some use, and this is the part of the graph that we're always most interested in, really, where the regulator cuts out whatever it's set at, and looking for that power spike. 'Cause what we're really looking for is for it to come along and either be a gentle drop off or a sharp drop off. We're trying to eliminate this little peak here. So I hope that has been of some use.